All right, so when we're speaking about UFOs, what's considered credible? How do we classify something as credible? What do we deem credible? What falls in that category? These are questions we need to start asking ourselves seriously. This video here is the most credible UFO sightings allegedly erased by the government. Let's get into it.
Every now and then, it's important to wrap or rewrap your head around some UFO and alien encounters as a reminder as to why the whole world is UFO crazy, and yet we still don't have any answers as to what they really are, at least not officially. Now, some of these stories you may know about, but not all the details. Here are 5 unbelievable UFO cases. Number 5. The day UFO chased a jumbo jet. On November 17th of 1986, a routine cargo flight turned into one of the most baffling and controversial UFO encounters in aviation history. Japan Airlines Cargo Flight 1628, a Boeing 747 carrying a shipment of French wine from Paris to Tokyo, was cruising through the cold skies of Alaska when something extraordinary happened. Something that defies explanation to this day. Captain Kenju Terachi, a seasoned pilot with over 10,000 flight hours, was at the helm. Beside him were co-pilot Takanori Tamafuji and flight engineer Yoshio Tsukuba. And their flight plan was simple, a routine trip across the polar route, skirting Soviet airspace and heading home. But as the jet reached 35,000 feet above the desolate Alaskan wilderness, their journey took a turn into the unknown. It started with a sudden appearance of 2 unidentified objects. Terachi first noticed them at his 11 o'clock position, hovering about 2,000 feet below the 747. The objects were massive, each roughly the size of an aircraft carrier, and they moved with a speed and agility that left the seasoned crew in awe. And they weren't blips on the radar either. These objects were visible to the naked eye, shining with an intense, almost otherworldly brightness. As the crew looked on, the objects began to close in on the aircraft, performing maneuvers that seemed impossible by any known standards of aerodynamics. The lights, pulsating in a rhythmic dance, suddenly darted in front of the Boeing, illuminating the cockpit with an eerie glow. The pilots could feel the heat emanating from these crafts, and it was as if they were being drawn into an invisible vortex of energy. And for several minutes, these UFOs continued their cat and mouse game, darting around the plane as if they were studying it, perhaps even toying with it. Terachi, both fascinated and terrified, couldn't believe what he was seeing. And was this some kind of advanced military technology, a secret weapon, or something far beyond human comprehension?
And it's like they can't do anything. There's no way for them to defend themselves on that type of craft. Like, that's gotta be scary to just see this and know I'm completely rendered helpless in this situation. If it decides to go on offense and attack, I'm just hands behind my back, can't do nothing. No, I don't like that feeling.
As if the situation wasn't surreal enough, the objects then suddenly disappeared. Only to be replaced by something even more perplexing. A gigantic, walnut-shaped craft, roughly the size of 2 aircraft carriers. And this one was like the mothership of the 3 crafts, as if the first 2 were doing reconnaissance before giving the go-ahead for the larger one to come take a look. Captain Terachi reported the sightings to Anchorage Air Traffic Control. His voice calm but laced with urgency. And they wouldn't have believed them about what was happening, except radar operators themselves confirmed it. as they too could see the strange craft shadowing the jumbo jet. In an effort to shake off the pursuer, Anchorage directed Tarachi to perform evasive maneuvers. The 747 descended, banked, and changed course, but the UFO remained locked in, mimicking their every move. For 50 long minutes, the strange encounter continued, and Tarachi and his crew were helpless, seemingly trapped at 35,000 feet. But then, without warning, the craft vanished, dissolving into the blackness of the night sky. The radar screens went blank, and the Boeing was left alone in the skies. When Flight 1628 finally touched down in Anchorage, Captain Tarachi provided detailed sketches, descriptions of the movements, and a minute-by-minute account of the encounter. But what followed was an all-too-familiar story, a government cover-up. The FAA conducted an investigation and their findings were inconclusive, and some officials dismissed the sightings as a misidentified military exercise or rare atmospheric phenomenon. Others suggested that the crew had simply been experiencing fatigue or hallucinations, but Tarachi knew what he had seen, and so did his crew.
Wait. So I'm experiencing fatigue and hallucinations, but I still have the ability to pilot this craft. That is insane to me that y'all would say that and paint me out to look that way. Number two, why wasn't there any type of military sent up there for their defense? No, nothing sent to their aid? That's strange to me. Number two, that's strange to me.
The story was leaked to the press, and the world was captivated, but as quickly as the story gained traction, it was buried. Tarachi was grounded, his reputation questioned, and the incident faded into obscurity, becoming just another footnote in UFO lore. Number 4. The Exitor UFO Incident. It was just after midnight on September 3rd of 1965 when 18-year-old Norman Mascarello, recent high school graduate, found himself walking along a dark, desolate road near the small town of Exitor, New Hampshire. Hitchhiking his way back home, Norman was no stranger to the rural landscape, but that night, something was different. The air was heavy, and an unsettling quiet enveloped the countryside. As Norman made his way along Route 150, a sudden intense light pierced through the darkness.
I got right over to this stone over here, I'd say close to this stone wall, and this is when this thing appeared, and it was like it came out of nowhere. I was just zap. All of a sudden, there it was, big as a house up over these trees.
At first, he thought it was just a truck with its high beams on, but as the light grew closer, he realized it was something much bigger than that. The light was so blinding that it illuminated the entire field next to him. In panicked, Norman dove into a ditch, hoping to hide from whatever it was coming towards him. And that's when he saw it. A massive object, pulsating with an intense red glow, hovering silently just above the treetops. The craft moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if it was searching for something or someone. And frozen in fear, he watched as the craft seemed to glide effortlessly through the night sky, making no other sound than a low, almost imperceptible hum. The encounter felt like an eternity, but in reality, it lasted only a few minutes before the craft suddenly shot off into the distance at an incredible speed, vanishing into the night. Norman sprinted to the nearest farmhouse where he banged on the door pleading for help. The family let him in, and after hearing his frantic story, whether it was real or not, they called the Exeter police. Officer Eugene Bertrand, a veteran of the Exeter Police Department, responded to the call. Initially, he was skeptical, of course. After all, stories of flying saucers and little green men was the stuff found in pulp magazines, not serious police work. But when he saw the genuine terror in Norman's eyes, well, he knew he'd actually seen something. Bertrand decided to take Norman back to the scene of the encounter. and what they would find there would defy all logic and expel any doubt the officer had about the authenticity of the young man's claims. As they approached the field, the night was once again pierced by that same blinding red light.
And they walked out into the field, and Norman yelled, "Look out, here it comes," and up over the treetops comes this object right at them with the red flashing lights.
And come up over the tree line in this direction.
Now that's a first for me. I didn't expect that. Normally in these stories, the end result is the police officer takes him back there, never sees anything, walks away, thinks he's crazy. Thinks it's something. Maybe he saw something, but definitely not that. But no, it happened when the officer got there. Yeah, that's the first time for me hearing that.
Officer Bertrand watched in disbelief as the enormous glowing object hovered silently above the trees, just as Norman had described. And backup arrived in the form of Officer David Hunt, who also saw the craft cast an unnatural light across the landscape. And then, just as before, it vanished in the night without a trace. By the next morning, word of the strange encounter had spread like wildfire through the small town. The officer's accounts, combined with Norman's terrifying experience, gave the story an air of credibility that was impossible to ignore. And soon the press picked up on the story, and the Exitor UFO Incident became a national sensation. Investigations by the U.S. Air Force, civilian UFO researchers, and even astronomers couldn't fully explain what had happened that night. The Air Force's official investigation labeled the incident as unexplained, meaning they couldn't say if it happened or if it didn't. Some suggested it was a secret military experiment. Others believed it was a natural atmospheric phenomenon, all the things we hear about when talking about UFOs. But for many, the most chilling explanation was the simplest one. That something not of this earth had visited that small town in New Hampshire. Witnesses, including Officer Bertrand, stood by their stories until their dying days, unwavering in their belief that what they saw was real and unexplainable.
Crazy. But y'all see what we up against in this day and time now. Because back then, if they wouldn't believe an officer of the law who's saying what he saw and another one that said what they saw with their own eyes, like, that should tell you what we're up against in this day and time. Even with these decorated pilots coming forward and saying that, there's still so much skepticism. There's still so much disbelief that they're just willing to be like, nah, couldn't it be? Had to be something else. No.
Number 3. The Tinley Park Lights. On the night of August 21st, 2004, the quiet Chicago suburb of Tinley Park became the focal point of one of the most compelling UFO sightings in modern history. And that day was a typical Saturday evening. Neighbors were barbecuing, kids riding bikes. But as the sun faded and the stars began to dot the sky, something else appeared in the heavens. A formation of lights that would change the lives of those who witnessed them forever. At approximately 8:30 p.m., the first reports began trickling in. 3 red orbs, forming a perfect isosceles triangle, hovered silently above the town. They didn't blink like airplane lights do. They didn't move in a way you'd expect an aircraft to move. And most disturbingly, perhaps, is whatever this was made no sound at all. And for nearly 30 minutes, hundreds of witnesses watched in awe, some in fear, as the lights remained eerily still. And calls flooded the police station, and eyewitnesses described the lights as being almost hypnotic, their deep red glow unlike anything they'd seen before. Despite the overwhelming number of reports, the official explanation remained frustratingly vague. The FAA claimed there were no scheduled flights in the area at the time. Military officials denied any exercises or tests, and meteorologists offered no natural explanation, so what were they? Then, just as the mystery seemed to be fading off of people's radar, the Tinley Park lights made a shocking reappearance. On October 31st, 2004, Halloween night, which is fitting, the lights returned. And this time, the encounter was even more intense. Witnesses described seeing them hovering lower and closer to the ground, almost as if they were watching the people. And as children went door to door in their costumes, the skies above were filled with the ominous glow of these strange orbs. And something weird this time around was that several witnesses reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, primal fear that seemed to emanate from the lights themselves. And some even claimed to have experienced missing time, a common phenomenon in alleged alien encounters. They looked at their watches to find that minutes, sometimes hours, had slipped away, unaccounted for.
Oh my God, like I just saw the most amazing thing in my life.
I have no clue as to what to believe it could be. Could be anything. I would have no idea.
Was it a case of mass hysteria, as everyone was primed because of the August sightings, or did something far more otherworldly actually occur? The lights were to show up again on September 30th of 2005, and once again on Halloween night of 2006. Seen by multiple people, even photographed, this time many claim these lights weren't separate, but part of a single triangular-shaped craft with the lights positioned at each corner. The object moving silently before it suddenly vanished without a trace. And this was a close encounter of the second kind, an encounter with an actual physical object. As the images spread, it reignited the debate. What were the Tinley Park lights?
This was something unusual. Was it flares on balloons? I mean, if you want to believe that, that's fine, but it's an absolute lie.
To this day, they remain one of the most perplexing UFO mysteries in history. Despite numerous investigations and countless theories and the passage of time, the truth remains elusive. Perhaps the answers lie in the skies above, waiting for us to discover them. Or perhaps some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Number 2, the Hudson.
If we go on throughout time and never figure this out, like all of this information coming forward, jeopardizing your livelihood, your life, your credibility, everything just goes like, if people risk that all for nothing, man, that's just, I don't like that. I don't like that, man. That's why I keep diving in, digging in, uncovering things, peeling back layers, trying to find out information, whether good, bad, real, or fake. Because I believe that there's something to this. It's way too many accounts for there not to be. So, yeah, I would hate to think that this is all for nothing someday.
Hudson Valley. In New York's Hudson Valley, something extraordinary and unsettling began to unfold here in the early 1980s, as the skies became the stage for a series of multiple mysterious events that had witnesses questioning the very foundation of reality itself. It began on the evening of March 17, 1983. Just after sunset, something unusual caught the attention of a few onlookers. In the darkening sky, there was a light, not just a single one, but a series of lights arranged in a distinct V shape, moving almost gracefully across the sky. At first, the witnesses weren't sure what they were seeing, but as the lights continued to move, completely soundless, it became clear that these crafts, or whatever they were unlike anything anyone had seen before. And calls began to flood the local police stations, and people from all walks of life, farmers, teachers, lawyers, shopkeepers, and local officials, all reported seeing the same thing.
Holy good God.
Are the V-shaped ones the most common? I'm thinking that. Out of everything I heard and seen and witnessed in these videos throughout the years, I think the V-shape is the most common, to be honest with you.
I don't know.
Not quite.
I'm going to tell you something, honey. I don't know what the hell it is.
We all came out over here at the road. We looked up at I-84, and we saw this huge object just hovering over the truck in kind of a shape of an L, with all lights, like a city of light.
A massive, boomerang-shaped craft adorned with rows of lights. And perhaps the craziest aspect about the Hudson lights that this wasn't a one-off event. The sightings continued from there, seemingly becoming more and more frequent as people began to look up often with the news of what was happening. And from the small town of Kent to the bustling streets of Peekskill, people were seeing this mysterious craft almost nightly. One particular strange account came from a group of night fishermen at the Croton Reservoir. As they cast their lines into the water, the sky above them lit up with the same familiar V-shaped formation. This time, the craft descended lower, closer to the ground, till the men could see its underbelly. A massive, dark surface with no visible seams or rivets. It was, in their words, like nothing made by human hands. And Croton is close to the Indian Point power plant, which sits just off the river. It was a nuclear plant that is closed now, but back then provided 25% of New York City's power. There's long been a connection between power plants, weapons facilities, and UFO sightings, as if these otherworldly crafts are inspecting what it is we're doing down here on Earth. In June of '84, this V-shaped craft, which, according to reports, was roughly 900 feet long, hovered about 300 yards above that plant, and all the guards saw it. Of course, this was reported, but pretty quickly it got stuffed down away from the mainstream media, described as some sort of mass hysteria that had occurred among the men there. As the reports mounted, so did the skepticism. Local authorities thought it could be a secret military project, perhaps a new type of aircraft being tested by nearby Stewart Air Force Base. But the Air Force denied any involvement, and the sightings continued, seemingly unconcerned with human explanations. Despite the media coverage, both local and national, as well as various individuals and government entities looking into the case, the mystery remained. For every skeptic who claimed it was a hoax or a misidentified aircraft, there were countless others who swore by what they had seen.
I looked up, and right over my head, virtually, it wasn't far off, it was right over my head and very still, there was a rim of lights in the shape of a triangle.
And then, just when the frenzy was at its peak, came a revelation that no one expected. In the summer of '84, a group of pilots and aviation enthusiasts from the area came forward with a confession. They had been flying small planes in tight formation, adorned with bright lights, as a prank to fool the UFO community. The media jumped on the story, eager to put the mystery to bed, and for a moment, it seemed like the case was closed. And the skeptics now had their answer. The Hudson Valley UFOs were nothing more than a practical joke taken too far. But as the dust settled and people began to dissect this new information, the cracks in the story began to emerge. For one,
as we know it would, we knew that was BS. We knew that was, come on, man. Y'all expected us to believe that?
the pilots' formation flights couldn't account for all of the sightings. Their small planes, no matter how cleverly arranged, couldn't explain the massive, silent craft that so many had witnessed. Nor could it account for the encounters that took place on nights when these pilots were nowhere near the Hudson Valley. And then there was the issue of the witnesses, many of whom were trained observers like police officers and air traffic controllers who would not be easily fooled by a few lights in the sky. If you're a non-believer, then likely you'll take this as a reasonable explanation. But if you do believe, well then, you know that this explanation is just to cover up whatever is really going on. Number 1. The Kelly Hopkinsville Encounter. In the rural town of Kelly, Kentucky, nestled between endless stretches of farmland, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But on the night of August 21st of 1955, Kelly would be thrust in the national spotlight, and its name would become forever synonymous with one of the most bizarre and terrifying encounters in UFO history. And that day had been stiflingly hot, and the evening brought with it a little bit of cool air that everybody welcomed. Inside the farmhouse of the Sutton family, 5 adults and 7 children gathered, including Billy Ray Taylor, family friend who had come to Kelly from Pennsylvania looking for a taste of country living. But what Billy Ray found that night was anything but a simple country experience. And shortly after 7 p.m., Billy Ray stepped outside to get some water. As he reached the well, something above caught his eye. A bright, silvery object streaking across the sky, trailing a rainbow of colors behind it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, and it appeared to land in a gully just beyond the edge of the property. Billy rushed back to the house, and as he burst through the door, out of breath, he excitedly told the others, "You're not going to believe this. I just saw a flying saucer land in the back field." At first, the others laughed it off, but soon that amusement turned to fear as strange lights began to flicker in the distance that they could see through the windows. And then they heard it. The sound of something moving through the trees, something that didn't belong there. Armed with a shotgun and a rifle, Billy Ray and his brother-in-law, Lucky Sutton, cautiously stepped outside. And they were countrymen used to dealing with the occasional coyote or stray dog, but this felt different. And that's when they saw it. Emerging from the darkness was a small humanoid figure, standing about 3 feet tall with glowing eyes.
And you don't even know them weapons you got are gonna be useful. They could be useless against that thing. That's what we don't know.
Its body was slick and metallic, its arms long and spindly, ending in claw-like hands. And the creature moved with an unnatural gait, almost as if it were floating, its large bat-like ears twitching at every sound. For a moment, the men were paralyzed with fear, but then instinct took over. They raised their guns and fired. The gunshots rang out across the farm, but the creature didn't fall as if the bullets had no effect. It then retreated into the shadows, and the men ran back to the house. But all this was far from over, as more creatures began to appear as if surrounding the home. And popping up at windows and scratching at doors. For hours, the family fought off wave after wave of these terrifying visitors, barricading themselves inside. Finally, just before daybreak, the creatures vanished just as suddenly as they had appeared. The Sutton family reported the encounter to the local authorities, but their story was met with skepticism. The police found no evidence of this invasion. There were no footprints, no blood, no trace of the creatures that had terrorized the family all night long. But the fear in the Suttons' eyes was real. Every single one of the people there. As real as the bullet holes in the walls and the shattered windows all around the house. News of the encounter spread, with some claiming it was a hoax, others suggesting mass hysteria, that the aliens were actually just gray-horned owls. A few believed it was a genuine extraterrestrial visitation. Years later, a new theory emerged that maybe these weren't aliens in the classic sense, but creatures from another dimension. That they didn't come in peace, nor did they come in war. They simply came by mistake, leaving behind a trail of fear and mystery that remains unsolved to this day. So there were 5 unbelievable UFO cases, and thank you so much for tuning in.